He had no convictions, no drug charges, no trafficking charges, and yet, at the time of his death, British law enforcement, investigative journalists, and underworld sources across 2 continents believed he was worth £200 million, all of it allegedly built on cocaine. His family said that was a lie. They said he was a property developer, a father of 5, a man who simply knew the wrong people in the wrong city. Both versions of him existed side by side for 40 years. And then, on the evening of November the 13th, 2007, someone ended the argument. One shot. Outside a gym in Speke, Liverpool. The killer was gone within seconds. Nobody was ever charged. The case is still open. And the question that sat underneath his entire life, who was Colin Smith really, was never answered. This is as close as we can get. Liverpool made certain men possible, not by accident, by design, geography, economics, desperation, converging in one city over several decades, producing something that had no official name, but every law enforcement officer in Britain knew existed. Start with the port. Liverpool sits at the mouth of the River Mersey on England's northwest coast. For centuries, that position made it one of the most important cargo hubs in the world. Coal, cotton, steel, and by the 20th century, containers, thousands of them, craned onto docks, loaded onto lorries heading south and east within hours. Here is the problem no customs agency has ever solved. A single container ship carries up to 10,000 units. Inspect everyone, and you shut down the port. The entire economy depends on volume moving fast, which means a percentage of what moves through always moves uninspected. The people who understood that percentage understood something most people didn't. It wasn't a gap in the system. It was the system, available to anyone willing to use it. But cocaine didn't come first. Heroin did. In the late 1970s and into the 1980s, heroin arrived in British cities with a speed that caught almost everyone unprepared. Liverpool was not just affected. Liverpool was devastated. Entire generations of young men, already with nothing, suddenly had a cheap, accessible, completely destructive alternative to nothing. The tabloids gave the city a nickname, Smack City. By the mid-1980s, estimates placed heroin users across Merseyside in the tens of thousands. Communities didn't just struggle, some of them disappeared, but here is the part most accounts leave out. A drug epidemic at that scale is not just a catastrophe, it is an education. The people running supply chains during the heroin years, from street level up, were learning. Without business schools, without mentors, they learned how to move cargo across borders, how to manage cash that couldn't go near a bank, how to build trust in a market where contracts don't exist, how to stay invisible. By the late 1980s, that generation had a decade of hard experience. And then cocaine arrived, higher margins, higher demand, higher status. The infrastructure was already there. It just needed a new product. What emerged wasn't what people imagine when they hear the word mafia. No hierarchy, no initiation, no godfather. What existed was looser than that. A network of independent operators, shared suppliers, overlapping connections, occasional alliances, cooperation when it suited, violence when it didn't. The key entry points were the ports, Liverpool docks, Felixstowe on the east coast, Southampton in the south, all feeding into the motorway network, cargo spreading across the country within hours of arrival. The European hub was Amsterdam. The Netherlands had become deeply embedded in British criminal logistics. Deals made there, cargo staged there, fugitives living openly in Amsterdam while staying connected to operations back home. And at the far end of the supply chain, Colombia, specifically the Cali cartel. At its peak in the early 1990s, the Cali cartel was the dominant trafficking organization on Earth, more corporate than its rivals, more disciplined, moving billions of dollars of cocaine annually into North America, Europe, the UK. Liverpool, with its port infrastructure, its experienced operators, its appetite for volume, was a natural fit. One man defined the ceiling of what this world could produce. Curtis Warren, born in Liverpool in 1963, left school with nothing. By his 30s, Warren had built an operation large enough to place him on the Sunday Times rich list. Estimated fortune, £185 million. one of the wealthiest men in Britain, who also happened to be a convicted drug trafficker, multiple convictions. He was eventually imprisoned in Jersey following a cannabis conspiracy, but by then the proof was already made. Proof of how far you could go from Liverpool with the right contacts and the right discipline. Colin Smith was described, repeatedly, as Warren's associate, and later, after Warren's convictions fractured the network, as something closer to his successor. That is not a casual comparison. It is a statement about scale, about what Smith allegedly stepped into, and about how high, allegedly, he climbed. Colin Smith was born around 1967, Liverpool, working class. He attended New Hayes Comprehensive, a secondary school in Woolton, south of the city. Not a school anyone was watching. He left at 16, no qualifications, no connections, no obvious path. He went into manual labor. Like thousands of other young men in Merseyside at that time, he worked with his hands. And then, at some point, he didn't. The nickname came from school, Smigger. The origin is nowhere in the public record. Anyone who grew up in a city like that understands how these names work. They attach in childhood. They never leave. For the rest of his life, in police files, in journalist notebooks, in conversations across the underworld, he was Smigger, not Colin. There is something about Smith that every journalist and every underworld source agreed on. Not one dissenting account. He looked like nobody. Balding, average build, old Lacoste polo shirts, Ford Mondeos, Ford Galaxies, family cars, cars that disappear in traffic, no jewelry, no entourage. The man allegedly sitting at the top of a £200 million operation looked, at all times, like someone who hadn't decided what to do with his Saturday. There is a term for this, gray man. It is not accidental blending in, it is a posture, a decision. The flashy drug lord, the one television sells you, that version exists, but it rarely survives long. Visible wealth is a target. It draws informants, rivals, investigators, journalists. It gives law enforcement something to point at in court. The operators who last, who build the most and keep it longest, tend to be the ones no one notices. Whether Smith was one of those operators, or simply a man the city's mythology consumed, is a question the record cannot answer. His stated profession was property development. His family maintains it was his genuine livelihood, not a cover, a business. 1992. British Customs had been watching. For months, possibly longer, intelligence had been building around a network of men connected to the city. And in 1992, it produced something tangible, a seizure, approximately 900 kilograms of cocaine, routed through Felixstowe. At street value, after cutting, that runs into tens of millions of pounds. This was not opportunistic. This was infrastructure. The investigation was given a name, Operation Singer. And then it reached Colin Smith. By 1993, charges had been filed against a group of men, among them Curtis Warren and Colin Smith, 26 years old, property developer, father. The conspiracy alleged at the time was described as Britain's largest cocaine importation plot. 190 million pounds worth of Venezuelan cocaine. Destination, Liverpool, distribution, across the United Kingdom. The trial was held at Newcastle Crown Court, multi-defendant, lengthy, expensive. The case against Smith did not survive. The judge discharged him and several co-defendants. Reason, insufficient evidence. Smith denied any involvement. He walked out of that courtroom without a conviction. Smith returned to Liverpool, to his family, to his business, to a city that had not stopped moving while he was in court, and the decade that followed would, depending on who you believe, see him build something extraordinary, or continue building something he had never started. After 1993, Smith's name disappeared from court records, from public proceedings, from anything official. But what journalists, underworld sources, and police intelligence described in the years after his death tells a different story. This is what they claimed he built. None of it ever put before a jury. The scale first. Not street level, not neighborhood supply. Individual transactions reportedly ran to hundreds of kilograms. Some sources cite single movements of 1,000 kilograms. A ton. One shipment. At wholesale British prices in the late 1990s, a kilogram ran between 20 and 30,000 pounds uncut. After cutting, diluting before street sale, the value multiplies significantly. 1,000 kilograms, fully distributed, could generate 30 to 50 million pounds from one movement. The method? Maritime container shipping. The same infrastructure moving consumer goods and industrial cargo worldwide. Cocaine compressed and sealed, concealed within legitimate freight, loaded at origin, shipped across the Atlantic, offloaded at Felixstowe or Southampton or European staging points. The volume of container traffic through major ports makes total inspection impossible. Customs agencies work on probability and intelligence, not thoroughness. A well-concealed consignment, routed through clean paperwork, has low interception odds without prior intelligence. That is how container-based smuggling works. The European hub, Amsterdam. By this point, the Netherlands was deeply embedded in British criminal logistics. Deals made there. Cargo staged there before onward movement to the UK. British fugitives living openly in Amsterdam, managing operations back home. Smith allegedly worked within this structure. Dutch connections, routes refined by a generation of operators before him. At the far end of the chain, Colombia. Specifically, networks that survived the Cali cartel's dismantling by Colombian authorities in the mid-1990s. The cartel itself was gone, but the contacts, the suppliers, the logistics, those fragmented, reorganized, and continued. British operators with the right relationships could still access volume. The arrangement reportedly was fronted, cargo delivered on credit, payment made after distribution, trust on both sides. Which brings us to the one element of Smith's alleged standing that every source, without exception, confirms. He was known as a straight flyer. In a market with no contracts, no courts, no regulatory body, reputation is the only collateral. A supplier moving cargo on credit has nothing but the buyer's word and history. A buyer who pays on time, every time, without complication, without attention, that buyer becomes genuinely valuable, rare even. Smith allegedly paid, consistently, on time, delivered on commitments, avoided exposure that could compromise the chain. Academic research on criminal networks, and there is a substantial body of it, identifies trust as the core operational currency, not violence, not intimidation. Those exist and have their function. But the people who build the most and sustain it longest tend to be the ones whose word holds. He didn't operate alone. The name that appears most consistently alongside his during this period, Stephen Lawler. Lawler ran a legitimate security firm, door staff, bouncers, operating visibly across Liverpool's nightlife. Behind that, alleged security operative for Smith's operation, and crucially, the man who handled direct contact with Colombian suppliers. Consider what that means structurally. Smith, at the top, maintains distance, not in the room when cargo is discussed, not on the call when quantities are set. His name absent from conversations when movements are arranged. Lawler is present. Lawler takes the exposure. Smith stays one layer back, clean. Spring 2001. A consignment was arranged, approximately 500 kilograms. South America to Amsterdam. Organized through Lawler's Colombian contacts. Street value after cutting, approximately 72 million pounds. Even by the standards of Smith's operation, significant. Already in motion. Then, May 2001, Stephen Lawler left a party in the city. He was shot dead. The killing had nothing to do with the consignment, a separate local dispute. The shooter was later acquitted, but the consequences were catastrophic because Lawler wasn't just security. He was the relationship, the man the Colombian suppliers knew by name, the man who had sat across from them and given his word. Gone, in a moment. For reasons entirely unconnected to any of it. The consignment vanished. 500 kilograms, 72 million pounds, did not arrive where it was supposed to arrive. What happened to it, according to underworld sources, Smith diverted it, sold it through his own channels, took the cargo and the money, then told the Colombians a different story, lost on the docks, deteriorated, perhaps seized by customs. These things happen in this trade. Cargo is intercepted, losses are real, but there is a procedure. When UK Customs genuinely seizes a consignment, documentation is issued. a seizure notice. Known in the trade as a yellow petal, it is the proof, the only proof that carries weight. Smith could not produce it, or did not. Without it, the suppliers reached their own conclusion. They had been robbed. The response was measured. An informant, someone close to the operation, relayed what had happened to the Colombian side, confirmed the suspicion, gave it form. A Colombian emissary traveled to Amsterdam to investigate. He was shot by figures connected to Smith. Whether preemptive, defensive, or a deliberate message, the accounts differ. But a Colombian representative was dead, and what had been a debt had become something else entirely. Smith's response, fronted out, used the one asset remaining, 15 years of paying on time, of honoring commitments, of being, in every interaction on record, a straight flyer. He reportedly argued his history should speak for itself, that his word had always been sufficient. And for a time, it appears to have worked, or at least bought time. The debt was not called in, not yet. But in that world, debts do not expire. They are not forgiven, they are not forgotten. They sit quietly, for as long as required, and then they are collected. Do you think Smith actually took that consignment? Or was this a genuine loss, a real seizure, a real accident, that got blamed on him after his death to explain what followed? 6 years. That is the gap between the alleged theft and the murder, the detail most people struggle with. If the Colombians believed they had been robbed, if a debt that size was outstanding, why wait? Because organizations operating at this level are not impulsive, not reactive, not emotional. When the sum runs into the tens of millions, the response is methodical, patient. A targeted killing of a prominent figure in a British city requires planning, local intelligence, access, a window, a moment when the target is exposed and reachable. Building all of that without drawing attention takes time. Smith was not oblivious. If the record is accurate, he knew what was owed. He varied his routine, maintained awareness, kept close to people who could offer some degree of cover. There is also the possibility negotiations continued, intermediaries working the problem, the debt unresolved but not yet terminal, outstanding, not yet called. Liverpool, meanwhile, did not hold still. Lawler's killing in May 2001 had set off a chain reaction. His brother Tony became involved in retaliatory actions. More killings followed, counter-killings. The cascading violence that unravels established structures. Power shifted. New groups consolidated. The Houghton firm, among others, moved into spaces left vacant. Liverpool's underworld between 2001 and 2007 was genuinely volatile. Not just for those directly caught in the Lawler fallout, for anyone operating seriously in that environment. Smith, if the record is accurate, was managing all of this simultaneously. The Colombian debt on one side, a destabilized landscape on the other, no obvious exit from either. By 2007, something had shifted. November 13th, 2007. Speke, Liverpool, Colin Smith, 40 years old, father of 5. He stepped outside Nell's gym on Alderwood Road at approximately 8 in the evening. A gunman was waiting, pump-action shotgun, close range, one shot. The killer was gone within seconds. John Lennon Airport less than a mile away. Arrests followed in the weeks after. No charges, nobody convicted. The case remains open. Police treated the killing as targeted, linked in public statements to business interests. What that phrase meant precisely was left unstated, but what followed told its own story. Meetings of Liverpool figures were bugged. The conversations picked up reflected real alarm. The vacuum Smith's death created was significant. Who would fill it, and what that meant for the supply chain into Britain? That was being discussed openly in rooms that were no longer private. Law enforcement at the time raised fears of a wider disruption, a conflict that could spread far beyond Merseyside. It did not fully materialize, but the fear was proportionate. It spoke to the scale of what had allegedly been lost. 2 theories, both still standing, neither resolved. The first, Colombian cartel retribution, the 2001 debt, the missing consignment, the dead emissary in Amsterdam. 6 years of patience, finally exhausted. This is the dominant version. In media coverage, in underworld accounts, in the intelligence picture as reported. The second, local rivals. Smith's family holds this theory. Jealous figures in Speke. People resentful of his success, real or alleged. Rumors fed, information passed. A situation manufactured, not a Colombian debt. Local malice. Both are possible. Neither has been tested in a courtroom. The case is open. And Smith's family has never seen a single person convicted for his death. Whatever he was a father, 5 children, a family that has spent years insisting the world had him wrong. They did not get answers. They did not get justice. They got a funeral. And then silence. That silence is its own kind of verdict, about how these cases end, about who they leave behind. Colin Smith was never convicted of anything. The empire attributed to him, the movements, the suppliers, the 200 million pounds, exists entirely in journalist records, police intelligence files, and underworld testimony. None of it tested in a courtroom, none of it proven. And yet, a 40-year-old man was shot dead outside a gym in Liverpool. The killer was never charged. The most credible motive on record involves a debt to a Colombian cartel, a debt from an alleged theft, a theft never proven. The truth about who Colin Smith was may never be fully known. The most dangerous figures in organized crime are often the ones history cannot quite prove existed. Colin Smith might have been one of them. Or he might have been exactly what his family says. A businessman, in the wrong city, at the wrong time, with the wrong enemies. If you want more stories where the truth is harder to find than the legend, subscribe. We'll be back.